Hello, and welcome to Mr. America, the Bearded Truth, covering political and social issues one liberty at a time. With
All right, so I was totally trying to play you guys my intro, and it just gave out on me. So I will have to rectify that at a later time. Love you guys, appreciate you guys all. Let me just give my own intro, if you guys are cool with that. So I am, of course, Jason Lyon, Mr. America, the Bearded Truth Show. You guys are here Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern-ish, on Muddy Waters of Freedom, where we will always start a couple minutes late because technical difficulties. We're trying to get your intro music to work right. I have an amazing guest tonight. One guy that I fell in love with, kind of similar to my last guest, Sean Hickman, where I fell in love with him just the first couple times of talking to him, because this guy is one of those guys that just is so relatable. He can spread such a beautiful message. And then I found out he was a former police officer. He worked for the NYPD there in the city. So with a background in being a police officer, being able to talk about police reform is something that I've seen him do so many times. And I knew the exact guest I wanted to have on. And of course, those two things, when you combine them together, means that you have to get Joe Garcia from North Carolina to come on for this. So we're going to bring him in just a few moments. But first, we got to do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, thank you to Matt and Spike for giving me a platform here on Muddy Waters Media, where we get to talk about my opinions, my views. And of course, we get to cover all of politics and social issues one liberty at a time, where we do that here every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. So thank you for Matt and Spike. Thank you to every one of you coming in, viewing this out, sharing this out, dropping some comments live. If you're coming back watching the replay later, dropping those comments, because that's going to help the algorithm just the same. Let me know how your Monday is going. Let me know what your big thing from the weekend was. What was the most exciting part of your weekend? Drop that in the comments. Help out the algorithm. Help blow this show up in a good way. But thank you to each and every one of you. And of course, thank you to the sponsors. Jason's got sponsors on his show now. So first of all, let's get into the original, the OG of ads that you guys are unaccustomed to hearing whenever you guys hear Jack Casey and the Royal Green series being spoken about. Of course, you guys have never heard the ad like this before, except for here on the Mr. America, the Bearded Truth Show Monday nights. So the Royal Green series by Jack Casey. It's a story of authoritarian and revolutionaries, a young man and woman seeking independence and meaning in a kingdom on the brink of civil war. Romance, espionage, action, and psychological drama. Elements of horror and mystery, and spirituality as well. Dark fantasy with magical realism and libertarian overtones. Themes of forgiveness and redemption. Written by the author while undergoing his own journey to find liberty and answer deep questions in his own mind. So make sure you guys get over to royalgreen.com. Show Jack Casey some love. This man is one of the best authors I know. He's a fantastic guy through and through. So go give this man some love. Share out the Royal Green. Give it to one of your statist buddies. Give it to one of your libertarian friends. And I won't say like other podcasters, this is actually a good gift. I've actually got a couple people I'm sending the books to. So I'm excited for that. The next advertiser I got to hit up is, of course, Fierce Luxury by Ashley. Fierce Luxury is a high-end bag and accessories consignment store based online. They carry the hottest brand like Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Gucci, and Hermes. Consign with them for 30% for a 30% fee and 20% less than most consignment stores. Find them online at fierceluxurybyashley.com and on Facebook in their exclusive group, Fierce Luxury by Ashley. Check her out, help her out. She's been doing an amazing thing where she's been helping out different campaigns, different ways of fundraising for different groups. Fantastic woman through and through. Plus, if you're trying to hook up your lady, you know she needs one of these bags. And last but not least, we got to talk about the greasy porcupines. we've all been there. We've waited too long to get our oil changes. We've had some issues. We've needed a tune-up or some maintenance. And what better way than to do it through pure agorism? The idea that we can work in unison with others to be able to achieve our common goals. Well, with Alex Flores, back in 2020, with the shuttering of the economy, he witnessed an increasing number of motorists who were foregoing automotive repairs and maintenance because they just couldn't afford it. Even as things began to open back up, for many people, lack of reliable transportation due to foregone maintenance and repairs has stood in the way of them being able to regain employment and earn a living. So in April of 2020, Greasy Porcupines was established to help those in need to get their vehicles back on the road, but who couldn't afford those expensive shop prices. So Greasy Porcupines is a growing network of mechanics dedicated to getting motorists back on the road, paying for what they can, or trading or bartering. He's given oil changes for free, as well as given oil changes for $500, because there isn't a price there, because he is there to help out one another and be able to work this through. What a fantastic man Alex Flores is. So I gotta give him as much support as I can. So he is currently servicing there in Arizona and looking to expand nationwide. But without further ado, we do got to go over, and Joe Garcia has been waiting patiently. I see him over there looking like he is ready to hop on this topic tonight. I am so incredibly excited. Police reform, criminal justice reform, prison reform, these are all under those big buckets of things that Jason just loves to talk about. And so we've got an amazing guest coming on tonight, Joe Garcia from North Carolina, or as I like to call it, Brent DeRitter, if he was in the chat, would already be yelling at me for this. Yankee, Carolina. Joe Garcia, welcome in. How are... Oh, no? Oh, no? It's not working. Did I fix it? I did not fix it. I did not fix it.
Can you hear me at least?
They can hear you.
Hey, there we go.
Yep, I gotta slightly fix it, but then we are good to go. There we go. Perfect.
Awesome.
Joe, how are you doing tonight?
Good, man. How are you?
Oh, just the typical Muddy Waters technical difficulties. But doing great other than that. So, I want to know, and the people, well, more importantly, the people want to know, because I've heard a little bit of this. I fell in love with your story. I love where you've come from. So, take me from the beginning. How did you become, what inspired you to become a law enforcement agent? And talk to me through your career real quick, if you could.
Sure. So, like most people growing up, we see a lot of positive portrayals of police on TV. I grew up in a pretty decent neighborhood where we really didn't see the cops much. We didn't have much interaction with them. They were a middle-class working neighborhood. And as I got older, my family still was living in the neighborhood I grew up in. And I just said, look, this would be a good career choice. Most cops are out there doing good stuff. And, all the stuff that you grow up listening to, right? Your parents, hey, and even in school, if you're in trouble, look for a cop, all the positive portrayals in movies, TV, everything else. So, I that's the line of work I chose, and ended up going into the New York City Police Academy back in 1994. Started my career there. Went and worked as a patrol officer out on the streets in Brooklyn, New York, for a while. Eventually made my way up to the detective squad in my precinct, investigating, robberies, burglaries, grand larceny cases, and whatnot. And then I eventually moved up to the computer crime squad to the NYPD. Worked in Manhattan for the last 7.5, 8 years of my career. And that's where I finished out back in 2014, retired from there. And then I went into banking, doing fraud investigations, essentially. Oof. And but what ended up happening was somewhere around, I think it was 2007, there was this guy on stage at the 2007 presidential debates in South Carolina, a guy named Ron Paul, who was up on stage with my former boss, Rudy Giuliani, and who started speaking about blowback when they were talking about the wars in the Middle East. and Dr. Paul started mentioning, blowback. It's from our policies and our actions in the Middle East that are causing this. It's not because they hate us for our freedoms and all the stuff that we were told from the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Which I admit I bought into that.
I think we all did. I think we all bought into that a little bit. I mean, it's just propagated through like every media, every source that we get, and so we're just like, yeah, they hate us because Second Amendment.
Yeah, well, for me, I actually go back a second before 2007, when 9/11 did happen. I was a police officer then when the attacks happened. I ended up losing two cousins who were civilians that worked in the North Tower. And after that, it was just, I was really apolitical at that point and became a raging neocon right after that, because it was, let's just bomb the crap out of the Middle East because, hey, you know what? They killed my family. So I just want to take them all out. And that's kind of,
sorry to hear about your cousins, but yes.
Thank you. And that's kind of where my political compass was at that point until 2007. And then here's this, doctor from Texas talking about blowback and the cost of our foreign policy in the Middle East. And basically watching every other candidate on stage and even the moderator kind of chiding Dr. Paul for that. And he just stood firm on that. And that was kind of like my light bulb moment. And I started, looking into a lot of videos, and I watched how in every single interview that Dr. Paul did, his position never changed. And that was because he stood on principle. He wasn't trying to win points with somebody. He wasn't trying to curry favor. These were his principles. These were his positions, and he would stand pat on them.
Yes.
And that really got me looking into libertarianism. And that's kind of where my path started. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't overnight. It actually took years to get where I am now. But I started, that was where my path started. Basically.
Now with this blowback thing, certainly a lot of us in the libertarian circles have been listening to either Ron Paul or listening to others talk about blowback. Was there ever a moment in your career where you took that idea and you said, hey, there may be some blowback in the way that we're policing within our communities? Was there ever that domestic idea of blowback as well?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I had been out of being a uniform cop at that point. Where I was on the street. I wasn't writing tickets or arresting people on the street. I was still investigating crimes and arresting people, just not at the street level per se. And after some time, after seeing that debate and then really starting to think about blowback and how it applies to other things, I really started thinking about how policing can have blowback on communities and how that ends up becoming anger towards us in a sense, right? So, you think about, like, I'll use the example of a seatbelt summons, right? Yeah. So when I was a young cop, it was, hey, you got to give that seatbelt summons because you'll probably prevent somebody from getting into a bad accident and getting hurt or possibly killed, right? So that was the mentality that was pushed. And you see all these ads on TV, click your seatbelt or get a ticket. And then, they just push the whole, seatbelt safety. Now, I'm not against seatbelt safety. I wear a seatbelt. I think everybody should. I've had plenty of friends that, I've actually had a friend that died because of not wearing a seatbelt. And I've had a few friends that have survived accidents because of seatbelts. So I'm a proponent. Yeah. But what I'm not a proponent of necessarily is, anymore anyway, is giving out seatbelt summonses because you're not hurting anybody, right? There's no crime there. It's just revenue generation. Either somebody's going to wear their seatbelt or they're not. You giving them a summons is not going to change that. In fact, I know plenty of people that won't put a seatbelt on until they see a police checkpoint. So, what good did it do? And they'll take it off right after. So what good did it really do then, right? But you know what? So here's where we get into the blowback part of it, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe the person that you just gave that summons to was a single mom who was in between jobs. Maybe she's in a rush, or maybe she already finished a second job and she's got to relieve the babysitter and make her way home to see her kid. She just wasn't thinking and didn't put her seatbelt on. Now you give her the seatbelt summons. I don't know what they cost nowadays. I think they used to be $25 a long time ago. They're probably up to 50 or 100 now. I don't know.
Yeah, they're like depending on the
Yeah.
state, of course, but
Yeah. So now think about this, right? So you give this person a summons for a seatbelt, something they weren't harming anybody. They didn't do anything to anybody. They didn't commit a crime. They didn't hurt themselves. It was just a victimless
Yeah.
event, right? It's a victimless event. And so now you give them this 25, 50, 75, whatever it is nowadays, summons. And let's just say now they're already working two jobs because they're a single parent. Or maybe they're not a single parent. Maybe they're just somebody who has a low paying job, right?
Yeah.
And they have just enough to make their, make their bills. And now what happens is you give them the summons and they have to make a decision. Do I pay my rent or my mortgage or my bills, or do I feed my kids, or do I pay the summons? And a lot of times the choice is to not pay the summons. And
Which
then
I think
what tends to happen. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that what this really does is, because we're talking about somebody who's not high in the economic scale, and this is where a small fine, a small fee, something that somebody in the middle class or certainly somebody in the upper class can, oh, here you go, here's $25, here's $50, I was gonna blow that on the golf course, shooting 18 and get it from the beer cart, that's not a problem. But there are people out there that this destroys them. I couldn't imagine.
And it's a really hard choice. And it's a choice at that point, right? I either do A or I do B. And I really can't do B right now. So I got to stick to doing A. Whatever the choice is. Whether it's a single person who's barely making ends meet, whether it's a single mom with a couple of kids that has to make a decision to feed her, whatever it is, like you said, low income folks who that $25 or $50 is a lot. It's an impact.
Yeah, I don't want to harp on the seatbelt conversation for the entire time, of course, but I've got a corner store. Literally, you drive out of my driveway, drive to the end of the street, turn right again. So I'm behind my house. There's a little corner store that I can go and grab. When I was smoking cigarettes, I can go get them. If I need a quick drink or whatever it is, I can drive there. I'm 20 mile per hour zone, 20 mile per hour zone, 25 mile per hour zone. I have almost been pulled over and did not have my seatbelt on for that drive. Is it unsafe? Sure. Am I likely to die? There's a potential, depending on how the impact is and everything else. Was I speeding? Was somebody else speeding? there's a lot of things into it. The idea that now I can't go get that pack of cigarettes or whatever I was doing because now I have to save that money for that. Right with what you were saying, nobody was being hurt by me not wearing a seatbelt. Was I making the best decision at that point? No, of course not. I could have made a better decision. We all could have. But is that the right pursuance? How is that going to affect my view of a police officer when I'm just merely running around the corner real quick? And for me individually, right, I'm going to hop on social media and be like, look at these cops. They're out here just trying to make revenue because I'm trying to go and run to the quick corner store and I got pulled over. Now I'm inflamed, I'm enraged, and I'm riling up other people. Suddenly what you have, and this is one of the things I really wanted to talk with you about, because we've discussed this and I think that we're in a complete agreement. Is that through some of these bad interactions, you have some people out there that use very inflammatory points and they're very argumentative, they're vilifying, and they're just a cab, right? All cops are bastards. This is their thought through and through, and so we've dehumanized them because people have had bad interactions over and over again, and so once one person has a bad interaction, it gets dogpiled on with a bunch of other people, and suddenly it's every cop out there is just a bad person. Every cop out there is walking down the street trying to steal all of our money, trying to find out when your seatbelt was clicked, trying to find out, are all your headlights working, are all your taillights working, trying to find a way of getting that big grab or worse, that we don't need to have that. And so when we talk about policing reform, when we talk about criminal justice reform, when we talk about these reforms, right, it's not to be pro or anti-police, it's not to be pro or anti-community, it's to be pro everybody, it's to be pro society. And so I am not of the belief, and I certainly don't think that you are either, that we're anti-police when we talk about this stuff. There's a structure there. There's a reason for law enforcement, and it's to help make our society better. And there's a side of community, that community has to play its part in this as well. And so we can try to talk about these things to make a better society, make it to where we're not dogpiling and just trying to use police officers as the outlet of our anger and everything else. So really long tangent, I apologize for that, but the end of the day, right, we want to be able to have these good conversations of what was the police doing, why were they taking the actions they did, how was their training going, how can we change this for a better outcome in the future. And as you were talking about the seatbelt thing, good intentioned, bad outcome, potential blowback.
Right. I mean, what a lot of people have to understand, right, is not everybody was born a libertarian. Right. You have the few that were born into it. But other than that, most people should realize that most police officers went through the same K-12 system and college system that most of us all went through. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different. Most of us had parents that told us that the cops were the good guys and, the other people were the bad guys. And for the most part, movies and TV shows push police in a good light. And most police are good people. They really are. They're well-intentioned. Yeah. Right. Yeah. They're really trying to be. But there is also a little bit of cognitive dissonance there too. Yes. But the thing is that overall, the majority of police officers that are out there on the street really believe in the job that they're doing. Right. Again, now, whether they're looking at it, that a lot of them don't come to look at it like I have, but they're out there trying to do the right thing. Whether or not at the end of the day, they really are, is a different story. Yeah. But they think that they're doing the right thing. And
we could do our part with them and with our communities of planting those seeds. Let's plant those seeds. Let's get those light bulbs turning. Let's get right. Stuff moving.
And most libertarians have to understand that we're not going to have libertarian utopia tomorrow. There's not going to be a privatized police force tomorrow, right? Abolishing the police is not going to happen anytime soon. I'm 50. It is not going to happen. If I make it another 50 years, it ain't happening then either. Okay. So what's the best that we can do? The best that we can do is try to reach out to cops and talk to them like people, right? And try to explain to them what they're doing when it comes to enforcing victimless crimes and revenue generation and all this stuff. Because if we can get that message through to them, maybe they stop enforcing certain things like seatbelts or loose cigarettes or any other of the hundreds, if not thousands, of victimless crimes that are on the books, right? Yeah. Because the government policing is not going away. So you could scream ACAB all you want. You could scream that all you want. You could talk about abolishing police. They're not going anywhere. What really needs to happen is that people need to, put their money where their mouth is. They need to start talking to cops like they're human beings. And that's not to excuse cops that do awful things. Like, we should not be excusing Officer Chauvin out in Minnesota. That guy deserves everything he gets. You know what I mean? Like, that's an awful human being. Sorry. Sorry for sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry to my, my friends who might be watching this, who, my former colleagues, but sorry, Chauvin was a piece of garbage. There was no need for what he did. Sorry. Yeah. I don't care what you think about George Floyd. Forget about the fact, whatever his record was, whatever drugs he had in his system, it does not matter. That situation did not give him the authority to execute that guy on the street. Sorry. That's what it is. Right. But let's talk about what caused that situation to happen. It was, him passing a counterfeit bill. Right. It's almost like Eric Garner out in Staten Island, New York, right?
Yep.
Okay. So here's all I'm going to say about that whole thing is that cop that put the hold on him, his intention was not to kill Eric Garner. That's not what happened. Okay. His intention was to get Eric Garner under control, because what happened? He was there to enforce a victimless crime of selling loose cigarettes. And why is that law on the books? Because somebody's not getting their money somewhere, right, for taxes. And then what happens is that the cops have to answer out that call, right? Because they're made to answer out that call. And then when they go there and they tell this guy he's under arrest and he doesn't want to go, they're being told that they have to arrest him by supervisors. And when they go to put him under arrest and he resists, they're going to do what they can to put him in cuffs. And if you watch that video, as soon as they had him cuffed, they let off him. Like, they didn't stay. It wasn't like a Derek Chauvin situation where, you know, they were kneeling on his neck or they were choking him out for, you know, 8 minutes before he expired. That's not what happened there. Watch that video again, and you'll see that Officer Pantaleo like lets him go as soon as they get him cuffed. Okay.
But it was,
so, but the point is that it's the crap law that you know, that victimless crime law of selling loose cigarettes that brought the cops there in the first place.
Yeah. So
and if we can convince them to not enforce those things from the ground up, you know what I mean? Talk to sheriffs, talk to chiefs, talk to captains, and get them to not send their guys out for stuff like that. You know, that avoids so many like unnecessary interactions between police and the public.
So that brings up a great point, right? And I've spoken about this a couple times already, but we need to have a legislative change, but at the same time, we need to have those conversations with law enforcement. And Tom Collar, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, has said, he's from Minnesota, but he said, I've been speaking with local lawmen regarding the stigma you're speaking of. And this was, of course, the stigma we were talking about earlier. And I was actually wanted to bring up, we had a special election here in South Carolina. Our former sheriff of our county got arrested for taking a secretary on state funds and going off to have fun with her, leaving his wife and kids here. So he's sitting in jail. So we had to have a new sheriff get elected. And so during the campaign for electing a new sheriff, I sat down with many of the different candidates, and it was to ask them questions. Hey, look, you know, I want to know, what are your thoughts on you know, I sat down with one and there's a group of us, and we were like, hey, what are your thoughts on unmarked police cars being used for traffic violations? It's like, I don't see a problem in that. Now, this is a guy that I've had many conversations with. He leans libertarian on many things, but he had never had that question posed to him. And so it's like, well, are you doing it for revenue? Are you doing this for safety? What are you doing this for? Why does that car need to be unmarked? Because we understand, you know, of course, like the flow of traffic will change if you have a marked car versus an unmarked car. But if you're just out there just to try to get people, is this actually stopping this, or is this increasing the stigma that you guys are out there for a revenue scheme? And by just planting these seeds with them, Kaylor, thank you. Sorry about that, Tom. Just planting these seeds can have those light bulbs turn on, can have those trees take root. And so I encourage each and every one of you guys to get engaged, get involved, have these discussions with your local lawmakers, have these discussions with your local law enforcement. And just because it's on the books doesn't mean that it needs to be exercised. And that's the angle you take with them. But just because it's on the books doesn't mean that it's right. It's the angle you take with your legislators. And so we will, of course, continue to have these conversations. But yeah, no, it's speaking of, this was something that I was really excited about talking about you with. I hate to swing far left on this. I don't know if that's right. Swinging further away than where we were. We were discussing yesterday, and there was a reference that you had made that I was unaware of, but a local municipality had passed. Let me pull up the actual word. A shot spotter. One of our cities had just got a shot spotter installed, and I was unfamiliar with that. Can you break that down for us real quick? I want to learn about this.
So shot spotters are it's a like a gunshot detection system that can be installed, and it'll. When I was on the job, we didn't have them in our precinct at the time. These came out sort of afterwards. Mm-hmm. But from what I'm to understand about them is that I guess they're systems, microphones or whatnot that are installed, and supposedly they're able to distinguish gunshot sounds versus other sounds, and then direct officers to a location.
Okay.
But from what I'm also to understand, I haven't researched it deeply, but I know that there have been some cases where arrests were made based off of shot spotter, sending the cops out to a location and arresting somebody who wasn't necessarily involved. I got to be honest, I haven't really researched it deeply, but I do know that it's from what I've heard, it's really not that reliable at the end of the day.
That's kind of what I was thinking, was like, as you were describing this, is I've got to Google this while we talk, but it seems like it's in its infancy stages, and so implementing this is kind of putting your entire populace, whatever size of municipality, and as a guinea pig for this, and that's kind of scary. To think that we're just going to have this be created. This was founded in 1996. ShotSpotter was. Stock price of $36 right now, in case if anyone's out there. But so if it's in its infancy stages, right, and so it's only been around for what, 25 years, and you're gonna put this in there, and you're gonna have, as you said, you believe that it was like a faulty arrest of somebody being in an area, and so we got a shot here, you're getting arrested like that. Yes, absolutely. It's something that I definitely want to dig more deep into, because it's an interesting concept.
Right.
I would love to see how that would work. Go ahead.
The other thing is that I think they tend to get installed in low income areas also. Like you're not gonna find that in a rich area, let's be honest.
Yeah.
So it leads one to believe that it's placed there for a reason.
Yeah. I think that there may be some cause for like the economic scale of like, where more crime happens. When we talk about policing, right? From what I've been able to gather through research and everything else, is that you kind of have more policing in lower crime or in higher crime areas, which happens to be in a lower economic area. And so it makes sense as to why they would do that. I would be interested to see how a shot spotter would work in an area like Chicago, where we know that there's plenty of rounds being fired off each and every weekend. How accurate would it be, and of course, would it result in lives being saved? I think that as we've kind of talked about the reliability there, it would be interesting to do as a check mark, like as a test. I don't think that I would want to see it actually be utilized as a piece of evidence in a certain
right, and that's the problem. It's going to end up being used as evidence, right?
Yeah.
Because part of it is to they set up numerous microphones in a however many square mile area, whether it's one or multiple square miles, and then what you get on that is they try to triangulate where the shot noises are coming from. And I think one of the problems is, I think there was a report out of Chicago, actually, as a matter of fact, without Googling it, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, where I think there was more false positives than anything. So, is it really doing anything?
And Blake McDaniel from the chat said, is this not what the David Chipman had something to do with creating? And David Chipman on his LinkedIn from August of 2013 to February 2016, he was the senior vice president of public safety solutions and ShotSpotter Incorporated.
There you go. And we all know about David Chipman.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he's not head of the ATF right now.
Yes, thankfully he couldn't even make it in. But Blake, thank you so much for that comment. Yes, absolutely, he was engaged and involved with that. Just showing you, ATF is all on board with this, right along with the NRA likely. think at
But
the
that's another one of those situations where it sounds good, right? It sounds like it's something that's good, but it's really not.
Yeah.
It's good intentions, but the road to hell is paved with a lot of those. So.
Yes, very much so. Spike Ventures. Yeah, no. So it's incredibly interesting to find like how these things are going about. And so you said that this was happening in a city there in North Carolina. So I'm gonna dive into that. I'll give you guys some updates through the Muddy Waters page in the futures. Because I'm incredibly interested about like the reliability and the trustworthiness of this product, as I said. But I've realized I swung as far away from the conversation of like actual policing reform or the policing discussion. We talked a little bit about,
but you know what though? But the thing is, see, that's a technology that if it's flawed, it's going to create unnecessary interactions with the public.
Yes.
Right. So that it's part, believe it or not, it is part of the discussion. Yeah. It's just that it's not police officers directly that are creating the interactions with the public, but it's technology employed by the department that's causing that to happen.
Yeah.
So it's definitely. It's all part of that.
Oh, definitely. I was just thinking like individuals and like how we're interacting and like the stigma, and then we go, and then this device that sees it, hears it, sends it, ships it, and yeah. So no, I definitely am excited to follow up on that on that part of the discussion. So we talked a little bit about blowback and kind of like the perspective of how things are changing, and we talked a lot about victimless crimes. We talked about seatbelt laws. We talked about loose cigarettes and not paying your taxes on them when you sell them, and everything else. What would you say is like in your time, whether as a police officer or outside, since having those breakthrough moments in 2007, what would you say are like the biggest things that you would call for the citizens to do in order to help inspire some change? Or what would you say is like, what would be the best way to turn on those light bulbs for law enforcement in order to kind of see it through a different lens?
I would say as far as the citizens go, just like I mentioned earlier, you again, I'm not saying not to hold police officers accountable, but there are a lot of police officers that are out there every day trying to do the right thing, that they believe they are doing the right thing. Again, we were all propagandized as we were growing up through the public education system and by our parents, right? Because they taught us these things. Look for the cops when you're, if you're lost or you're in trouble, go look for the cops, right? Nowadays, most people wouldn't tell their kids that, but for a long time, that's how it was. And there are still parents that do that. I live in a neighborhood here where they almost worship the cops where I live because it's a small department. They do a lot of positive stuff, but most of the negative stuff that they see out of the negative interactions that they're seeing is with a lot of drug dealers or folks doing robberies and stuff like that. And a lot of people here just aren't really big proponents of drugs. So, that's where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. But what I would say is just don't, talk to them. First of all, talk to them like they're human beings, right? So I'll go this way. How many of us have friends or family that were in the military, right? Or that were in the military. Yeah. Okay. If you weren't in the military yourself, and you were trying to maybe talk somebody out of staying in the military a long time if they had gone in, or trying to keep them from going in the first place, like how would you approach that? Would you tell them that they're pieces of garbage for wanting to be soldiers or sailors or Marines, or tell them that, oh, you served over in Afghanistan, oh well, you're just a baby killer and all this other stuff? How would you get them to come to where we're at? Yeah. Right? You wouldn't do all those things. You would just say like, hey man, do you realize that you're over there because of all these bad policies that the government put us in? All the, let's go back to 1953 in Iran with the coup, and then let's move that up to everything that happened around about when the Marxist communists took over in Afghanistan, and then here comes Osama bin Laden. We start backing him to fight the Russians, and you go through that whole thing. You should take the same approach if you're trying to speak to cops. Like come at it from, hey, maybe they just maybe they just think that what they're doing is right. And you
Yeah.
need to just explain to them, like I said, explain, how does a seatbelt turn into a woman losing her job? A single mom who's trying to take care of her kids. Here you go. You gave out the summons. She couldn't afford to pay it. She had to make a choice: pay that summons or feed her kids. She didn't do that. Some interest built up on the summons after a while. There's a bench warrant out for her, and they suspend her license. Now, the next time she gets stopped on the road while she's trying to work to feed her kids, you end up picking her up, and you end up arresting her because now her license is suspended. Just because somebody's license is suspended doesn't mean that they forgot how to drive. Essentially what they're doing is they're saying you just didn't pay this fine for a victimless crime back at step one, right? Now she not only has to spend time away from her kids in jail, but she might lose one of her jobs, if not both, because she's been arrested, right? Was she a criminal? Was she somebody who was robbing a purse or someone's home, or
who was the victim in the original thing?
Exactly. And so, from point A to point Z in this whole thing, where is it that, you did a good thing? Like what, where is it that you saved somebody?
Yeah. How could you have made a positive impact?
Right. And go from that perspective. And as far as if there are any police officers or whatnot that are watching this, try to understand why people are angry with you. Most of us end up, in our time in uniform, we end up dealing with people on their worst day. And a lot of times we're the ones causing the worst day. Or you happen to be there and you're trying to console them on their worst day. There have been plenty of times I've had to go to scenes where, people's family members died or whatnot, and you're trying to console them. And that's a bad day for them. You might be trying to do something positive, but that's a bad day for them.
Yeah.
And anything that you do wrong during that interaction can cause them to dislike you. So, just keep that in mind.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. And I want to highlight that real quick, that you're not going to have an interaction with the police officer, especially if you're the one calling them for a circumstance. You're not calling them on a good day. You're not like, I've had such a great, fantastic day. Like birds are chirping. Everything is going my way right now. And so I need to have these interactions with police officers. And so I want to make a call to all of us in the audience who aren't police officers, who may not have family members that are police officers. I'm fortunate. I had a couple family members that were police officers, couple in the military and everything else. So a lot of these topics of specifics I've had, but it's understand that when we have these negative perceptions that are being portrayed from others, that they potentially were having a bad day before, or because of this officer they were having a bad day, and so we have to understand that as your emotions go up, as you become more emotional with that circumstance, maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of an exaggeration that's happening there as well. And so, kind of rounding all this together, if we could just humanize one another, if we can realize that the man behind the badge is a human, if we can realize that the person that gets pulled over for a seatbelt violation is a person, if we can just humanize each other, if we can come into these conversations thinking that the other side is there with good faith discussions and with the best intentions, we can actually move common ground, and we can find common ground, and we can move the middle ground, and we can make things better, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, people got to realize that, cops aren't made in a laboratory. They're us, right? We are, it's the population that makes this up. And yes, police officers should be held to a higher standard. I don't care what anybody says. Even my colleagues in law enforcement, you should be held to a higher standard. You have the ability not only to take away somebody's freedom, but to take away somebody's life. Okay. So you should be held to a higher standard. Sorry.
Yeah. No. But, and that's, that's,
yeah. No, but like I said, just people but the civilians need to realize, is like I said, for all of that, police are still human beings, and they still have the same faults that we all have. No matter how they try to act, at the end of the day, they can have a bad day just like everybody else. You could lose a child, you could have gotten into an accident, you could have lost one of your parents. your house could have went on fire. These things have all happened. During Hurricane Sandy, I had one of my partners like lost his house. House got flooded out in Staten Island, New York. Those are things that happen.
Yeah.
He almost lost his family in that. They actually had to come out and rescue him. He had to run up to the second floor of his house and get rescued. So we have bad days too. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's you made the point of like having a higher standard for police officers and kind of their conduct. And I don't want this to be a gotcha question because we didn't talk about this before, but qualified immunity. Is it?
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's in place for a reason, but it's also been abused a little bit too. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that, the lawsuits the complaints and the lawsuits that can come up just from regular interactions, even if the police officer did everything from A to Z perfectly, there are people who are still going to sue the department. And, I don't know if there's a different system that can be put in place for that's workable. I haven't really sat down and thought much about it.
Yeah.
Probably something I should do, as far from a messaging standpoint. But if people just understood all of the complaints and lawsuits that come out for things that shouldn't even be there in the first place, and that the officer would have to personally take on. And you also have to realize that with qualified immunity, there's lots of things that don't get stopped by qualified immunity, because once they reach a certain point, there's already been, case law on it, and they can go forward with it. And qualified immunity doesn't protect the officer.
Yeah.
But it's a fine line, because what'll happen is, and I know that there's a lot of people that'll probably say, "Oh, great, that's awesome." If you get rid of qualified immunity, you're not going to really find a lot of people to take that job, right? And again, I know that it sounds great in the idea phase, like let's get rid of public policing, but you still would have to handle that in a private policing situation. Like, how does a company deal with hundreds upon hundreds of lawsuits that are coming in for, a private policing company? How do they deal with that? Even when the officer has done the right thing from A to Z, how do you keep your company from being buried in lawsuits?
Yeah, no,
I really don't know what the answer is to that, to be honest with you.
It's a great question, and I'm glad that I was able to ask you this. I've actually got but if it's okay, I'm gonna plug. So October 11th, 8 p.m. Eastern, here by Mr. America, the Beard of Truth, I will actually be diving into qualified immunity that night. So I'm excited for that conversation. I think that everyone in attendance knows this guy that's going to be doing it. Many people love him. But you guys will have to stay tuned for that one. But yes, no, I completely agree with the idea that it's a huge struggle there, right? To give, if anyone is unfamiliar with what qualified immunity is, right, this was a precedent that was created basically by the Supreme Court that protects government officials or government workers, including police officers, from civil lawsuits based on certain different criteria. And so by not having those lawsuits come through, right, many people have viewed these as frivolous, and as Joe was talking about it, you can have a great abundance of them come just pouring through, and you're going to flood the system. You're going to be holding all of these, you're going to be tying up all these officers. It's incredibly difficult to navigate, and so there has to be kind of a structure there has to be some way that we can kind of in my opinion, right? In my opinion, we want to be able to allow for people to have the ability to redress their grievances in accordance with the First Amendment, but we also don't want to make it to where we've lost the capacity for any kind of enforcement on that front as well. And so there is a ground that we have to kind of navigate through and work through. I hope that this is coming through as articulate as I'm thinking it does, but it means that as we've discussed in previous shows, I think it was with Dwayne Lester, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. What is the trade-off? What is the right trade-off for society? And that's why these conversations are so incredibly important. So I didn't want to get you with a gotcha question, but I wanted to make sure I asked that. I would feel terrible if I did.
But people just need to realize that coming from a big city police department, right? And I'm sure that this will happen in LA. I'm sure that this happens in Chicago and Detroit, Miami, where not only the system for people to file civil suits against cops is abused, so is the civilian complaint review board system is the same thing. Like, you could be, on point the whole time, and people will just make civilian complaints about you. And that's abused also. It just doesn't cost you a dime, as far as an officer goes. It doesn't cost you a dime to have that complaint come against you, but it takes an officer off the street for a day. It could potentially put a mark on their record.
Yeah.
Because it's not typically it's not a police officer, a detective, or police supervisor that's interviewing you for these. A lot of times it's college kids. At least that was my experience when I was in New York City. A lot of these people were straight out of college, barely none of them had any sort of street smarts at all. Not that makes them bad people, but a lot of them came in not liking cops to begin with, believe it or not, and a lot of them had a bias.
Yeah.
But that system gets abused too. And what ends up happening is like anything else, when something gets abused, it's almost like the whole cry wolf situation, right?
It's difficult.
We shouldn't abuse these systems.
It's incredibly difficult to find the right accountability system for a system that clearly, right, we agree that there needs to be accountability, right? Bad cops need to be reprimanded, good cops need to be rewarded, and how do we implement these things? And so this is just one of the one of those big things that fills into this conversation. Yes, I could talk about this for days. Because you're right? When people come in with, when we look at jurors, right? When they're looking to fill out their jury, right? You want to find people that are unfamiliar with everybody involved with the case. You want to find people that don't have a bias one way or the other, that are going to be able to come to their conclusion just through the facts of the case. Here's what the law is. Here's what the facts of the case. How do you feel this person is? Are they innocent or guilty? Here are the charges. Right. That's the way a jury goes. And when you talk about the criminal, the civilian, what is it? Review board. Is that the correct term? Yeah. Yep. So the civilian review board, right? So what this is this is a panel of community members who get to sit down, and they basically get to review certain instances that get brought before them, and they get to figure out, is this officer, or was this interaction, was this aligned with, or was this not aligned with principles, with the policy, with the law, etc., etc. And so they, in some cases, they have teeth where they could really mess up somebody's career, or in other cases they can just merely file recommendations to the chief of police or the sheriff or whoever's in charge of that municipality. And so you spoke about, there are those people that have those biases, and it's not just biases for or against, or that's what it was, right? It's not just biases against. You're gonna have people on there, regardless of a police officer, and I think we've all seen those people. Regardless of what a police officer does, because he has the badge, he's justified in it, and it's like that's wrong. That's completely wrong. As well as the person that says he has a badge, so he's wrong. It's like no, stop that. We need to actually look at this. We need to have a level head and reason and rationale as to how we come to the conclusions we do. And so finding those proper system levers of accountability, I think is where we're stuck.
Yeah, and there are at least that, as the case in New York was, and I'm going to assume, I know I shouldn't, but a lot of big cities probably employ people to be on a civilian complaint review board. So it's not just random citizens being called in to look at a case. It's actually people who are employed by their respective city.
Oh, wow.
That's their job. That's their full-time job. So that's the thing too, you got to keep in mind, is that it's not always just, oh, we'll you know what, we'll put a notice out to a bunch of people, whoever's interested in doing this review session, they'll come in and we'll cycle them out. There are, like I said, in New York, people were on a payroll for the city, and they were brought in to specifically, be the reviewers for these cases.
That's really interesting. I wonder. I got to learn more about those civilian review boards, because I'd be interested to find out like what their pool of people is that they have on these things, how many are being utilized, are they trying to use them for specific areas of cases, right? This person's like one of our go-tos for like drug related cases, this is our go-to for this, things like that, if they make specialists, if you will. I'm inclined, so in having conversations with some of the sheriff candidates, we were talking about this very topic, and what a good civilian review board does and how it functions, right? And of course you want the review side, you want them to be able to review. How much teeth do you want them to have, because you're afraid of those biases coming out and having good cops be reprimanded or having bad cops be rewarded? That's kind of been the sticking point for a lot of people. If you give them no authority, then people just say there's no reason for it. If you give them too much authority, you can destroy lives. Either way, it's yeah, it's amazing. We've got to figure out something. This is why, like, I love like having these conversations, because there's never a time in which we have conversations around any kind of an experience, right? Your lived experience as being a police officer, your breakthrough moment, and your perspective on how policing is done and everything else. I'm learning so much through these conversations, and we have such big world questions, and we can throw in our trade-off. But I'm hoping that this is turning the gears for all the people in the audience as well, so that we can, maybe you can be smarter than both Joe and I combined and come up with the perfect trade-off that minimizes the losses and a huge benefit to society, so we can have that accountability and we can see the community and the police work together. I think that you'd spoken about your former I think you called him your former boss, Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah. Yeah, he was the mayor of New York City when I first came on the police department. He had his terms there. His term ended after 9/11.
And he had a different policing practice than what a lot of law enforcement or mayors had. And I don't know if you recall it right off, but it was more of a community policing. Right.
Yeah. Basically during, and I think this has been adopted by a lot of, especially big city departments, is that whole broken windows policing theory. If you take care of the smaller things, the big things take care of themselves. So if you're writing a double parking, so you have cars that are double parked on an avenue in a busy city street, right? If you allow them to stay there, you can potentially have accidents get caused by it because people are going around, or it could be somebody that's the wheelman for a robbery or something like that. And by giving that summons, you might not stop the robbery per se, but if it happens, at least if that summons has been given, there's a record that summons is given, and they can go back and look and say, oh, okay, around that area at this time, there were, X amount of summonses written. And they pull all the summonses out, and then they go, okay, well, here are the cars that were on that particular street when that robbery happened. The son of Sam Killer, that's how they caught him, right? They caught him by a parking ticket. That was actually my old precinct that I worked in. Well, before I got there. But yeah, that's how they caught him. They caught him on a parking ticket. So that, that mentality, yeah. Yeah. So, essentially that was the mentality. Like, if you take care of small things, the big things will take care of themselves. Wow. But now what does that generate? That just generates more interaction between the police and the public that don't necessarily need to be there.
Yeah.
for every, however many thousands of summonses that are written out there on a daily basis in whatever city you're in, or hundreds of summonses, how many of them are really catching anybody, doing anything? They're just,
How much of
they're
them
just
are revenue?
generating revenue.
Yeah.
That's it. It's just generating revenue.
Mm.
So, but yeah, that was, back in New York prior to 1993, 94, you had, I mean, I grew up in New York City. If you watch any movie like The Warriors, The Bad Lieutenant, The French Connection, look at some of those old movies. That's what New York City really looked like. That wasn't done up for the movies. That's what New York City looked like back in the 70s, 80s, early 90s. The Bronx was burning. There's actually The Get Down, I think it was. It's on Netflix. It was how kind of like rap got started in the Bronx, New York, and you watch that show and how a lot of the buildings were like destroyed and on fire, and there was like smoke pouring out of the where the building's foundation was and stuff like that. That's what the Bronx really looked like back in that time, back in the 80s and all that.
Wow.
And so when you have the mentality that, oh, if we could arrest or summons the people writing graffiti, if we can get rid of the squeegee men that were another big thing back in the day was, you'd pull up to a stoplight in some parts of the city, and a squeegee guy would come out and start, squeegeeing your window with a bottle of dirty water. So the mentality was, we got to get these people off the street. We got to get rid of the homeless. We got to get them off the street. It's making the city look bad, and so on and so on and so on. But at the end of the day, what that ended up creating was a statistical nightmare for precinct commanders, because now, as they fight these things and they're fighting crime, they started keeping statistics of these things. And now the precinct commanders are fighting last year's statistics against this year's statistics, and they're always being compared. Yeah.
Metrics.
So there's all these metrics, right? So they used to have something in New York called traffic stat. And essentially what that was is they would look at all of the moving violations that were issued, red lights, speeders, stop signs, name it, and then it would be, well, this week last year you had X amount of red light summonses that your precinct had written. Why is it that you only have this many now? It's a percentage change of this. And then, and that changes things too. It's like,
so I think you just answered a question that people in law enforcement typically don't like to answer, but a lot of people have those questions. And the age-old question of, you guys got a quota, don't you? Well, we don't have a quota, but...
Well, yeah, they don't have a quota, right? But there is a quota. I don't care what anybody tells you. There is.
You got to hit your metrics. You got to hit those metrics.
And the thing is that a lot of that, nobody will want to come out and say this, but a lot of times, like, let's just say you're a little short on your performance, especially if it's on a consistent basis. Maybe you need to leave early one day because you have something to do. Maybe you want to leave early because you're going to a concert or you're meeting some friends for dinner. Your shift commander, could basically turn around and say, yeah, not today. Sorry. And you could have plenty of cops working, and you leaving wouldn't hurt the shift at all. Especially in a big city, where you have, 20, people or so working on a shift, maybe more. Yeah, that'll be held against you. Maybe you want to go to meal and your lieutenant or your sergeant doesn't let you go to meal because you've been falling under performance. So you have to eat out in your car. I've had these things happen to me, but I didn't care. So that's just me.
Yeah.
So.
No, I'd probably be in that. I say that. I think that I would be in that same boat of, okay, I'm okay with that.
Okay. You know how many times I've eaten in my car? I don't care. Doesn't matter to me.
I do it still. Like, it's not even a punishment. I'm just like, no, I'm on the go. Let's go. So, yeah. So that the age old quota question. I'm so glad that you were able to talk about that, because it is one of those things that everyone feels like there is, and at the end of the month or at the certain time of a month, there's always a little bit more of a police presence on the neighborhoods, or not in the neighborhoods, but on like busy streets and everything else. And it's just like, oh no, it's not a quota, guys, but it's looking at the metrics of last year. It's looking at the metrics of how you've been doing. It's looking at your own personal metrics of your personal performance and everything else. And of course, everybody wants to go out for their friend's birthday dinner on a Friday night. So when you gotta get jacked up, guys.
The question that needs to be asked is, okay, so you've gotten all these summonses. What has that done to protect the public? What has it really done?
Yeah.
And don't tell me stop accidents, because it doesn't.
Yeah, but it's definitely,
or stop reckless driving. It doesn't.
It puts us back into that perspective that we were talking about earlier of, now what do these people think of law enforcement? Well, you got this officer Jim Bob over here who's given 1,001 seatbelt tickets. He's given 250 broken tail light tickets. He's like, sure, he's helping in some way, but he's also
I could tell you that there were times when I was young in my career that I would go out and do traffic enforcement, and there was an intersection. If you put me out there, I could have written summonses every day, all day long, for people running red lights, legitimately running red lights, even with the marked, even if they knew that a marked police car was going to be out there, I'd still catch people every single time. So even just being out there doesn't stop people. It doesn't.
No. I've got a couple cop points along my way to work. I'm like, there's gonna be a cop up there. Oh, hey, there's a cop there. I'm still gonna go 79 in this 55. I'm still gonna go 79, just right along with the rest of traffic, and we're just gonna flow on. One day he's gonna pull over. He's gonna pull somebody over, and I'm going to give you the floor here in a second so we can wrap things up. But, you know, when he pulls somebody over, this is also something else that I would love to get your idea on. But when he pulls over somebody who is going with the flow of traffic and pulls them over, he's creating not only an unsafe circumstance because now they're off on the side of the road, but also causing a change in the flow of traffic could also be a safety hazard, because now everyone else is slamming on their brakes because you've got flashing blue lights. Have you been able to bear witness to this, or have heard of like actual incidents happening because law enforcement is doing law enforcement? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I was never somebody who wrote like speeding summonses. So,
okay.
But I have seen, people traveling on a highway, and mostly has been down here in the South since I moved down here. But it's a pack of cars moving, and it just so happens that the trooper goes after the slowest of the pack, and it's just kind of like, why? It's like, I can understand if everybody's doing, the speed limit slightly over, and here comes this one dude blowing through at 80, 90 miles an hour. Okay, I get it. But you grab the slowest, you have a cluster of people in 3 lanes, and you just so happen to grab the slowest one. Like, that's not cool, dude.
Yeah,
that's just not cool.
Yeah, it's hard to see like which one of these people are you going to pick out to go, all of you guys need to stop, because all the ones that don't get stopped, they're not stopping. They're gonna
and guess what? They're going to continue to speed, whether it's that day or the next day or the next day or the next day. So you haven't stopped anything.
No, you haven't. And I think that one of the things that we have to learn about like road driving, right? I know people in Massachusetts are massholes. I know that they're massholes. It doesn't matter if there's a law enforcement on the side of the road. Doesn't matter if they got a speeding ticket last week. They're going to be a masshole because that's who they are. That's the culture. If you drive in Massachusetts, you suck at driving, and I hate you. But not every one of you. If you guys are Muddy Waters fan, we love you. But but there is that culture there. And so no amount of law enforcement there is actually going to change it, but what you will change is the perception that law enforcement has. And I think that that's one of the biggest disservices that they can be doing. And and I've spoken about the civil asset forfeiture thing here in South Carolina. We have a county where we have a sheriff that was deputizing everybody across the state to come into his county and just pull people over along the highway. And it's just like, nobody wants to drive on that highway because civil asset forfeiture, speeding tickets, etc. It's just like, nobody wants to be there. So they're going to speed on the back roads. They're going to carry their $20 in cash or whatever that would have been taken. They're going to take that on the back roads. And so I feel like the over policing idea, and certainly the over is a subjective line, only is to the detriment of police and how they're being dealt with, or from the perception of the people. And so that's something
and
that
the militarization of the police too, right? I mean, a lot of that came out from the bank robbery in LA. I forgot what year it was. The two guys that looked like completely up armored and carrying automatic rifles. Like, how many bank robberies have you seen like that since then? Or you haven't seen that. But that's always an excuse to continue to militarize the police and give them, this surplus military equipment. What is it? The 1033 program? I always forget what it is, what the name is. 1037, 1033, the one where they can get surplus military equipment.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But yeah, I what's the need for that? Most police departments have their own special response teams, like the NYPD has ESU, Emergency Services Unit, and they're specifically trained for a lot of those things. There's no need to
have the general police officer.
have the general police, which in the NYPD that doesn't happen. But in a lot of these smaller departments, you have that. A lot of these smaller county and town police have a ton of military equipment they don't need. Like, how many towns have an MRAP that they don't need? I mean, seriously, how many IEDs you're going to have to worry about in your little podunk town in wherever South USA? Seriously,
it reminds me of a meme I saw a couple years ago. It's like, if you listen to Fox News, the jihadists are coming to blow up your Dairy Queen in Podunk, North Carolina. Or not North Carolina, North Dakota. But it's just like, nobody's coming for the Midwest, but you've got all these people just prepping, and they're like, they're coming for us. It's just like, no, they're really not.
They're coming for our cornfields, man. It's like, really?
They want the freedom in my cornfields.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fox News. But I have a question from the chat real quick for you, and then cool. I'm going to give you the floor to wrap us up. Some municipalities, this is from Tom Kaler, some municipalities have been caught shortening the duration of the caution yellow on the stoplights. Do you have any experiences with that?
No. When I was in the NYPD, we had nothing to do with traffic lights. That was all set by the city, by the Department of Transportation. Maybe in some of the smaller areas outside of large cities, that might be a thing. But from my experience, I'm not, and I won't say that it hasn't happened in other cities. I just know that from the NYPD standpoint, we didn't have any control. Like, we didn't have access to the boxes. We couldn't open them up and change the patterns or anything like that. People need to realize that in a lot of big cities, the patterns are there for a reason. They study flows of traffic, and they don't want people having access to those boxes. No, seriously. I mean, if you throw off a pattern in a place like New York City, you can end up creating a really bad traffic. And trust me, they don't want just anybody having keys to those boxes. That was something that we never had access to. But I'm not saying that it can't happen in a small town somewhere or in a smaller city. Where the sheriffs might have that. I don't know. It's possible, though. I would never say never.
Yeah.
But I would say in a big city, though, it's probably really less likely that happened.
Definitely. And with that, so I agree, like, that municipalities want to, usually it's like a DOT or somebody who's setting up the flow of traffic and everything else. They look at a lot of things, or they're supposed to. And we have actually one road here in the upstate of South Carolina that they the guy was drunk that day. He was just like, whatever. There is no flow either way on an incredibly busy road. So if you go anywhere 2 hours plus or minus on any of the rush hour times, it is the worst road to go on. But there are so many businesses. There's malls. There's Best Buy. There's Target. There's, you know, food. There's everything on this road. So you're kind of stuck going on this terrible road, and everybody knows which road I'm talking about if you're in the upstate of South Carolina. Because they just didn't care. And so I heard this question so many times during the sheriff's debate, as they were campaigning. They were like, can you guys change like the flow of traffic on this road? And they were like, that's not us. It's just like, we can't really change that. And so it's important that we do know where that importance is, or who has that ownership, because we need those. We need a good flow of traffic, right? If you have a heavy inflow coming from one area, you want them to be able to go through, distribute, and disperse throughout wherever they're trying to go in a healthy manner, and you want to allow for other traffic to flow as well. And so there's so many different things that goes into that. And I just did a quick Google, and it says between 3 to 6 seconds. I heard a thumb rule that basically it's going to be at least 1 second for every 10, starting at 3 seconds. So at 30 miles per hour, you're going to have 3 seconds, 44, 660. So hopefully there's some validity to that. I've heard that as a thumb rule. Of course, with every thumb rule out there, I before E, except after C, except for all of these other exceptions. So don't come at me if my thumb rule is off. But I want to thank you, Joe, for coming on tonight, and I want to know if you have any last big thoughts, any big things that you would be sad if you didn't share with the Mr. America, the Bearded Truth, and the Muddy Waters crowd tonight. If there's anything you want to share with us.
First of all, thank you. I had a great time. I've had a great time with our chats on Clubhouse and all that stuff too, which is what led to this. But just essentially, just remember that cops are people too. That government policing isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I know I'm repeating myself, but
no, you're good.
I just want to hammer this home.
These are great highlights. These are much needed.
You know, government policing isn't going anywhere. For as much as I'd like to see private policing, it's not happening anytime soon. So let's try to talk in good faith to law enforcement to try to get them to understand why enforcing victimless crimes is a bad thing. It's not a good thing, and it doesn't really help the community at all. And as far as any law enforcement that might be watching this, just remember, you should be held to a higher standard. You have the authority of the government behind you. You have a firearm. You have the ability not only to take somebody's freedom away, but to also end their life. And that could come through, a really bad decision on your part. And you should really know the laws too, because I've seen too many cops on film, say, "Hey, I told you to get away from me because I said so." That's not the law. You know what I mean? So learn the law. Try not to intimidate people just because you have a badge. Those guys I don't have any respect for. If you need to intimidate people just because, maybe you got your ass kicked in junior high school or high school, and now you got a badge and you think you're a tough guy. You're not really a tough guy. You're just abusing your authority. But also, just like Jason said, man, just let's treat everybody like human beings. And we might be able to get somewhere. Because just remember too, that, cops aren't the ones that write the laws, right? It's some guy or gal in a suit somewhere in your local town, in your county, in the state house, or up in DC that are writing a lot of these laws. But if we can convince them to stop enforcing some of these really crappy ones, we could be a little more free. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it. I appreciate it. And I want to thank you for coming on tonight. I've been excited for it since I met you. And you plug something that I try to plug every time, and I have yet to plug this entire 11 shows that have been back. And that is, of course, the Clubhouse. So if you guys have not gone on the Clubhouse, make sure you guys get over there, check it out, join in, lean into that. If I could do a couple quick more plugs, of course, you guys want to become Muddy Waters subscribers. So the low price of $9.99 a month, you guys can help Muddy Waters dreams become a reality, help support us, and you guys will be getting exclusive content. And so make sure you guys get over to anchor.fm/muddywaters/subscribe, help out, join in. You're going to get exclusive content from Spike, from Matt, from myself, and the Muddy Waters team. So we're going to keep growing, pumping out great content for you, and you guys may be able to see more from Joe as well. Maybe we'll be able to get some highlight stuff from our clubhouse conversations and everything else as time progresses on forward. So if you guys are finding guests that we're having on my show, on Spike's show, on Matt's show, you guys may be able to find more exclusive content there. So just lean into that, as well as plenty of other great stuff coming through the pipeline on that. And then also make sure you guys are going over to muddywatersmedia.com, muddywatersofreedom.com, sorry, muddywatersofreedom.com/store, and you can get your Muddy Waters merch. And you can look great while supporting the crew. But Joe, I want to thank you once again for hopping on tonight. It was an absolute pleasure. I know you've been busy. I know we've all been busy, and always excited to talk with you, man. Love you, even if you are from Yankee, Carolina. Keep doing great things up there, and hopefully you guys will be able to catch us in Waffle Houses one day. But
Yep.
But with that, I hope you have a great night, and I hope you and the audience have a great night as well. And I love you guys, and I will see you guys back here next Monday. And until then, Tuesday night, Muddy Waters of Freedom with Matt Spike. Wednesday with Spike on My Fellow Americans. Thursday with Writer's Block. And then Friday with Cajun and Eskimo Libertarians. We have From Bayous to Igloos. So great week to come through. And next week, we're going to keep on pumping out the great stuff. So stay tuned, guys. Come back. We'll see you guys soon. And thank you. Love you guys. And see you guys